Hello, I'm Jodie Simpson, and I'm going to be talking to you today about a project that I've been leaning on in the last 18 months. I'm going to go to my next slide. If it actually, oh, I forgot I did that. Right, just what to expect today. Did it actually turn over? Good, right. I always say in all the training I do, feel free to fidget, move or stim if you need to. I've always got a big bag of little fidgets there for when I get a little bit anxious. There will be some participation in this. I will encourage you to put comments in the chat. I'm not going to be looking at the chat. Kate's going to be doing that for me because I can't multitask. But there's going to be plenty of time to ask questions at the end. If you've got any questions as you're going along, you can put those in the chat so that you don't forget them, or you can write them down and put your hand up later and participate that way. And remind us at the end. Oh yes, so Kate's going to keep me on time because I'm really bad at my timekeeping. And you can have your camera on or your camera off. I don't mind. I do like to see faces. So if you'd like to, if you want to put your camera on, that would be lovely. The only thing is, if you look like this, like, oh my God, this is so fascinating, you will draw out a lot of information from me, and then I'll get sidetracked and I won't get through all my slides. So it's a 50-50 whether you actually dare put your camera on. Okay, so it's up to you. Okay, come on, turn over page. Hang on, I'm having some technical issues with getting this. Oh, there we go. Right, today's presentation then. I'm going to talk about some guidelines that I wrote for neurodivergent speech and language therapists. I know the title today was aimed at neurodivergent employees, and the project that we were involved in is completely relevant to neurodivergent employees, but I had an opportunity to work alongside the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, which is why it's kind of marketed to speech and language therapists, but it's relevant to everybody. So I'm going to talk to you today about some of the background, why we did a project to create some guidelines for neurodivergent speech and language therapists, some of the co-production process of writing the guidelines and how we went about doing that, and what is different about the guidelines. A lot of people that have that advised us and did some consultation when we were doing the writing process told us that these guidelines are absolutely groundbreaking for both employers and employees. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we think is a little bit different, and why that was needed, and some of the next steps of things, some projects, exciting projects that we have got coming up. So I know this is a busy slide, but it represents my head basically. So like I said, I'm Jodie Simpson. I'm a speech and language therapist. I started out my career as a French teacher, and then I went into speech and language therapy. I am autistic and ADHD, and I have complex PTSD, and I have what's called a monotropic brain. So I've got a brain that just goes like this. It focuses, but it's also that little picture there is a kind of a representation of how my brain works. When I get an idea, it just goes sparkly and lights up, and just, well, anybody that knows me, and there's a couple of people on this already that know that this is probably a very good, accurate description of my brain. I've already said I quite like on my email signature, I have like an accessibility statement, if you like, and I'm quite upfront about being autistic and the fact that I do have needs. So I like to let you know, because actually my timekeeping is terrible, and that's part of my neurodivergence. So it's actually better if I tell you up front, and then Kate has permission then to say, Come on, Jodie, stop talking. Next slide. Okay, so timekeeping's an issue for me. A bit about me. So I love data research. Bullet points are great, and I'm a bit of an info dumper. So ask me about pretty much anything, and I will tell you everything that's in my head. It turns out I'm actually very clever, even though I was bottom of the class when I first started in school. My communication style is very direct. You'll probably see that as we go through. I do tend to overshare. I'll try to be. My line manager's on this as well, and she's going to give me a stare if I go off on an overshare topic. Thank you, George. I think you'll be like, whoa. Yep, I do tend to have very brutal honesty. So if you do ask me questions later on, you will get a very honest and direct answer. Yeah, I have to be careful. I have to be just as careful answering that. In my career, then I've already said that I've been a teacher. I've worked in the NHS. I'd class myself as an activist now, a disability rights activist. I do some lecturing, and I'm just about to start a master's degree doing some research. And I've got a few hobbies that I'm collecting now: some poetry and hiking, and a bit of stand-up comedy, and a bit of blogging. Okay. So as you can see, I mean, just from that, you can see that picture is probably a pretty good picture for what's going on in my head. So, okay. The background. There was a disability working party that was set up by the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. And it was actually kind of set up by disabled speech and language therapists that got together and said, we need some guidelines. So they wrote some guidelines, and it was about 3 or 4 pages long. And I read through this thinking, oh, brilliant. It's actually really good. It did address neurodivergence as being under the umbrella of disability. And it gave me a real prompt to think about my own workplace needs as an autistic employee. And when I read through it, though, it gave me the prompt to actually start having some conversations, but it didn't really give me any answers, because it said, book an appointment with your occupational health and go and tell them what you need. And I remember thinking, I don't actually know what I need. I know that I'm struggling. I know that the PTSD is making my life difficult. But I didn't really know what I need. I didn't know what my needs were. So I went to social media and I started asking people. And it turned out that a lot of other people were also, a lot of other autistic and ADHD speech and language therapists were experiencing very similar things, that they didn't know what to ask for reasonable adjustments, and they also had some difficulty identifying what their needs were. So in the end, I was so desperate for support, and other people were clearly in the same position. I thought, what would be really good as a peer support group. So I basically, on the spur of a moment, another person that was on the social media, we just got together and said, let's talk. And we set up the neurodivergent peer support group for neurodivergent speech and language therapists. And we included students in it. We now actually have, so we set that up 2 years ago, and we now have 350 members, which is absolutely huge. So when we set this up, we started doing, well, I started running some polls in the group, and we started having conversations about reasonable adjustments and what we needed and things like that. And one of the polls that we put out was, have you considered leaving your job? Because this was something that people kept putting in the chat forum. And so we asked people, actually, have you considered leaving your job because your neurodivergent needs were not being met? And we were absolutely really gobsmacked that 88% of the people we polled said that they'd considered leaving their post, which we think is absolutely shocking. And at the time, I mean, we had about 200 members by that point. But we ran the poll another year, another 6 months later, when we had, and then we had twice as many participants, and we got back exactly the same number of 88%. Had said they considered, and it wasn't the same people either, it was different people because I went through the whole data. But in that second round, we also asked students if they considered quitting their course because they were struggling so much because of their neurodivergence, and 93% had said they considered quitting. I think the biggest shock was that about 40% of the group also said that they had either downgraded or considering downgrading their role. And that is really, really shocking. And now for some of them, these were speech and language therapists that had been downgraded to unqualified positions as therapy assistants, but they're still doing the speech and language therapy job, but without the pay. You know, so that a huge economic impact for people. You know, and I remember talking to one person who said that they downgraded their hours, but the problems were still the same because the problems affected every hour that they worked. It wasn't a fatigue problem, it was around areas of executive functioning, you know, and around their dyslexia and the fact that they weren't getting any support. And some of it was really simple stuff that's built into accessibility features in like Word and things like that, that nobody had ever even suggested this to them. And they'd been to occupational health several times as well. So clearly, you know, and that's what we were finding. Lots of people had been to occupational health and they came back and said, actually, occupational health have been useless. They're just asking us what we need, and we're not, you know, they're not helping us work out what we actually need. You know, I also did some, going back to that one before, there is more information about the peer support group. You can follow that link. I'll also put these slides in the chat as well. Okay, so I did a piece of informal research that kind of collated all of the experiences that people were talking about in the peer support group. And this was part of the raising awareness that we were doing, because myself and another speech language therapist called Polly decided that actually we needed to start having conversations with the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists to raise awareness of the fact that actually, as a group of neurodivergent speech and language therapists, and we're talking about autistic, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, a few with brain injuries, mental health conditions. Those are that's the main mix of the people that we have in our group. You know, but actually we were all experiencing very similar things, and some of them were, I'm not going to go into all of this because I've just put a QR code there to a research paper that I put together of that I presented at a local conference, which went viral overnight. And so you can read more about that. But there was a lot of discrimination, a lot of people, you know, really struggling to get the support they needed put in place. So, you know, in the peer support group, we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years trying to reframe the narratives about neurodivergence, trying to help people to understand actually that, you know, it's not a disorder that we have, it's a difference, and actually with that difference comes a lot of strengths, you know, and actually people, you know, in the group have said, oh my God, I didn't realize that I could see my neurodivergence as a strength. And you know, that is really sad. It's a sad situation to me. You've got all of this neurodivergent talent, but because the system of getting diagnosed is based on deficit and difficulty, and you know, and a lot of people are struggling even to get a diagnosis because they're not suffering enough. You know, so that's, you've got to prove how bad things are to even get on a waiting list. And you know, and that inevitably has an effect on people's mental health and the way the beliefs that people have about themselves and about what being neurodivergent is about. So yeah, so we've been doing a lot of like really great work within the group, just helping people to, I mean, they all talk to each other, they all tell each other, you know, like, oh, have you, like, I do this, I do that, that's really helped. You know, so it's been really good kind of like sharing that information, and people are literally coming back to us and saying, I feel like this group has completely changed my life. So here's some of the quotes that we've had from the group. So we've got things like, you know, people have got a lot of pride in their identity and confidence to disclose. Like, I love some of these quotes, like, I'm now in a tribe of people who just get you. I'm more passionate towards myself. It's one of the very few spaces in my life where I can be completely myself without judgment, which actually you think, well, shouldn't work be like this as well? You know, shouldn't we be able to go to work and be ourselves and have a, you know, a safe space where I can be myself? People are asking for interview adjustments, and that's like, it's got routine now. Like, people, they post on the group, right, I've got an interview, what do I need to ask for? You know, and everybody's saying ask for the questions up front. So it's, you know, people didn't know about this. I didn't know about this before I started doing the research for the guidelines. But it's been really good seeing people do these, and then the quotes, you know, things that they're coming back and saying, like, I asked for interview questions in advance as an adjustment, and I was able to be my best for the first time ever. Now I'm able to see all the positives about myself. There's a sense of belonging and validation. It's good to know that I'm not the only professional struggling with things that seem so simple to other people. I feel less alone. This one, I hear this so much. We did an annual survey for members, and half of the group wrote something along the lines of, I don't feel alone anymore, which is really, really sad, as but also really good that they found a space where they feel supported. Um, and I've always felt like an outsider in the profession, you know, and then they're saying, you know, but now I'm in this peer support group, I realize I'm not an outsider. I am actually different. And then the group has really helped with like celebrating strengths, self-worth, reframing our narratives. So people are saying things like, I can ask anything in this group and not feel like an idiot, because they're feeling like an idiot in, sorry for using that word, I'm quoting obviously, you know, they're feeling like that. They're feeling ashamed to ask really simple questions out in work. You know, and then things like this is empowering me to ask, to question more and to challenge perceptions, you know, and we are enough as we are. People need to stop telling us otherwise. I think that last one is really, it's powerful. I feel emotional reading these comments, you know, and I'm really glad that we've been able to provide this safe space. So we went to the Royal College then, and we did start asking them and started telling them about how things were for us. And we said to them that actually we wanted to write some guidelines. Now, I just wanted to do a little bit of an experiment here. You're going to need your phones for this. I don't know if this is going to work. A little bit of participation. So anybody that's gone for a cup of tea, quick, get back. Participation time. Right, so I just want you to have a think about, you know, how can we best support our neurodivergent employees to thrive? What are your ideas? I mean, you can use this, or you can put up your hand and say something. I don't know whether this is actually going to work, to be honest. Because last time I tried this earlier on, and it didn't want it. It didn't. Oh, there we go. There you go. I click on the word cloud and it comes up. It's working. You can see I'm excited. Let them be themselves. Yes, totally. Listen and support. Love it. Validation. compassion and kindness. Oh my God. You would have thought kindness should be a given, but I heard one person being told that they hadn't asked for reassurance as a reasonable adjustment. Okay, right. I don't know if the rest. Oh, safe space, brilliant. No judgments. I think there's a bit of a lag in what you put in and it coming up. So giving them time, yes. Brilliant. Okay, there's a few things on there. I'll we might come back to that later. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to get your ideas really, but now if I can get it to move on. No, I don't know what it's doing now. It doesn't want to move on to the next page. No, hang on a minute. I'll have to just escape from this and. Right. Right. Can you see the one that says I'll be asking the right questions? Yeah. Okay. So, okay. So I've put this on here because this is something that the process of writing the guidelines for neurodivergent speech and language therapists made us realize that we might not actually be asking the right questions for our neurodivergent employees, because like we've all been told that we have to ask people, what do you need? And that is absolutely the right thing. We do need to be asking people what they need. But we also need to be aware that a lot of neurodivergent employees don't always know what their needs are. And it's actually quite complex, really, because on the one hand, you've got interoceptive differences. So some neurodivergent people may not actually be able to identify things that are happening in their body and recognize that they're stressed. I know when I first started telling people, you know what, I'm really distracted when I'm in the office. And somebody said to me, have you only just realized that? Because I've always known that you are highly distracted when you're in the office. Just look at all the times you hijack other people's conversations. And, you know, it didn't occur to me that it was a problem until it became a massive problem. But I was not aware. And then the other thing you've got is that sometimes, you know, being able to say that I find X difficult is actually so intertwined with our professional identity. So, for example, I mean, I'll take a dyslexic example. You look at job adverts and it says you have to have a high standard of English, of written and spoken English. Well, actually, that excludes all of your dyslexic population. And, you know, I'm sure there's dyslexic people in here that will be able to tell you about the battle that they've had constantly to need to justify that they are good enough, that their level of English is good enough. And the same, you know, like I have some auditory processing differences, which means it takes me a little bit longer to process things. It means I need things like, if I don't have an agenda in advance, I sometimes get the wrong end of the stick, because I haven't had time to process and let things sink in. So I might get then told I haven't contributed enough. Well, yeah, because I didn't have time to think about it. Or I might be told I've contributed inappropriately, or I've been a bit of a liability in what I've said. Again, because I didn't have time to process that properly and to think about, you know, whether this was the space, you know, or another space. So, you know, actually, you know, in one job that I had, saying that was an issue then was met with, oh, well, you can't possibly do your job if you can't process something at the speed that everybody else is going at. So then you start feeling threatened, that your competency is threatened. So actually, one of the questions that we do need to think about is whether, do you feel safe enough to disclose the differences that you have? Do we as an employer, do we see neurodivergence or any disability as a difference, or do we see it as a disorder? Because actually the way you look at it does actually affect what you expect from that person. Because if you see that as a disorder, you might think, well, we need to put things in place so this person can fit in more. Whereas if you see it as a difference, you might say, well, let's have a look at what this person's strengths are and see how we can slot them into where they are functioning at their best. There was a piece of research actually that was done by the Autistic Doctors International on autistic doctors, and they actually found that the doctors that believed that their own autism was a disorder had much, much higher instances of self-harm, suicidal attempts. And those that saw their autism as a difference, much, much lower, their mental health was much better. So it is, the language we use is actually really important as well. So another thing I know, particularly speech and language therapists, one of the barriers we've had is that, we are experts, if you like, in autism. We are trained to work with people with autism, and I know a lot myself and a lot of my peers have said that actually that when they've disclosed they're autistic, they are treated as if like with the same clinical knowledge, which is often outdated. So they're being told like, oh, well, your theory of mind, or you must have low empathy. So how can you work with parents and be empathetic if you're autistic? So sometimes, people's clinical knowledge is a barrier, because then actually, and also there's this idea quite often that because we've been able to train to this level, that the things that affect the people we're supporting can't possibly affect us, like sensory differences. So that obviously doesn't apply to us. No, we're just really good at hiding it. That's all. But it does still affect us. I'm not going to go into all of this because I want to get on to a little bit more about what we actually did with the guidelines. But some of the things that came up and we felt was really important to talk about and to cover in the guidelines was all of these things, and also that there's implicit biases. The fact that we've been trained to think about neurodivergence in a particular way. We've been trained to think about neurodivergence as a disorder. So that actually brings a bias that's unconscious. Nobody's intentionally goes out to think autism is bad, but it's there's that stigma that gets reinforced about what we think autism is, what we think ADHD is, and that does actually affect then how we think about the colleagues that we work with that have that neurotype as well. A lot of the battles that we as neurodivergent speech and language therapists have had to battle is helping our colleagues to unlearn what they've learned, or for them to kind of come down from up there in their knowledge and understand how it affects us in our work situation. And there's also these ideas about fairness, and I think like probably everybody's talked about this in a lot of the talks this week, that there's this idea that when people have adjustments, especially somebody, I've got a first-class degree, so I'm clearly very clever, that I've got this unfair advantage, but actually I want to tell them, you know, I want to be angry and say, actually, I do really, really struggle. But then on the other hand, I think, well, if I unpick, if we start to unpick, why are people saying that it's unfair? You know, what are they actually saying? Are they saying, I think I might benefit from this thing that you're getting? You know, I think I might benefit from having some extra time to write a piece of work or having a proofreader just to double check my spelling. Or, you know, I think I might benefit from having some low lighting in here. Why aren't we looking at that instead of saying, you know, this isn't fair? Or if we're thinking we don't think this is fair, why aren't we looking to implement these to everybody and making inclusive workplaces where, you know, where actually there are things that benefit everybody? So why can't we have these conversations and then just implement that for everybody? That's a whole PhD in itself, that is. So I'll leave that for another day. Right, so process of writing the guidance. I'm just keeping an eye on the time because I want to give you plenty of time to ask questions as well. So the guidelines are about, the document is about, in Word, it's about a 45-page document in the end. So it's a huge, chunky document. It was made up. So basically, when myself and Polly went to the Royal College, we said, in fact, we'd already done some polls in the group and we'd asked them, what do you need? What do you want us to tell RCSLT? And pretty much everybody said, we need more detailed guidelines. We need something that sets out what we can ask for. We need we need a lot more detail. We need help unpicking what our needs are. So we went to the Royal College and say, you know, we want to write our own guidelines. Will you support us in this? And they said yes. Well, we were a bit surprised, actually. We were a bit gobsmacked. So we set about. I basically led a group, and we went back to the peer support group, and I basically ran a lot of discussion forums. We got everybody involved. We asked them, we've got the go ahead to write some guidelines. What do you need to be in there? So we had some social groups where we talked about it. We had online forums. We had people emailing us. I met with some people personally. And we gathered and we basically formed the chapters out of what people had said. And they're not any different from, we want you to address discrimination. We want you to address stigma and bias. We want you to address psychological safety. We need some more help identifying our needs. We need some more help thinking about what reasonable adjustments could work within speech and language therapy. So in the end, we had 16 authors, co-authors in the end, and I actually sat down with every one of them and I helped them I did basically supported them with some body doubling to write out like a description of what was going in their chapter, and then we left them to get on with it. There was quite a lot of challenges that we had because being neurodivergent, many of you will know that we also have a very high amount of mental health and burnout, and we were having to navigate that throughout the whole thing. So I haven't mentioned about the guiding principles there. I'm going to come to those in a minute, but as part of this project, that we had to recognize that because we were a bunch of neurodivergent people, we would have to make adjustments for ourselves, that we would need to make sure that everybody could communicate in the way that suited their communication preference, that also enabled them to give as much as they could, but also that there was no shame, and we had to be really upfront that actually we are all going to experience some burnout or exhaustion, at some point during this project, and we needed to make room and space for that to be okay. So, you know, one of the chapters, we had about 4 different authors involved in that, and it was okay. It was okay that that happened. You know, one wrote as much as they could until they burnt out, and then it was okay to pass the baton on to somebody else. So that's kind of how we did it. And then we got to the end, and everybody was involved with reviewing the chapters. So the chapters all got published in the peer support group. People commented, they told us what was missing, they told us what was wrong, they advised us on terminology. So it was a massive undertaking and a huge amount of work. And I think you'll agree that maybe 18 months was a fair amount of time for all of that to happen. So I'm actually starting a master's degree in this very topic, actually, in February, and I've started doing a little bit of background reading, as you do when you're very clever. And it turns out that we've actually used community-based participatory research principles. I didn't realise that we'd used them, but we had. So everyone was in the whole group was recognised as a whole, and that the researcher, if you like, myself and my co-authors, we were part of a unit of identity, a solid unit of identity, and that we were able to build our own community's resources and strengths. So actually, it wasn't just the people that were co-authors, because actually the whole group really were co-authors in some way. So we were able to facilitate a collaborative and equitable involvement of all the partners, which is everybody in the group, in every stage of the research that we were doing. Because actually, some of this research was stuff we were finding out from the literature. And some of it was what we were going back to the group and saying, what's helping? You know, what's working well for you? You know, and lots of people were saying things like, you know, this is why everybody started like asking for reasonable adjustments for interviews, because people were saying, well, I did this, and then everybody started doing it. And then somebody else said, we had 2 people at the start when we first set up the group. 2 people said, I've had an ADHD coach, and it's changed my life. And then after that, we did a whole thing on it, and I did some research on it. We found out more. We found out some good companies. And then every time somebody said, I'm struggling with executive functioning, we'd be like, go to Access to Work, get yourself a workplace coach. And then, so actually now, lots and lots and lots of people in the group have all had workplace coaches, and are seeing, you know, a massive change in the way that they're working and feeling much more positive about their work, and that actually their workloads are more manageable. I won't go through all of this, but basically it was about, you know, being mindful of social inequality. So making sure people's they had adjustments in place, focusing on issues that were relevant to the community group. Yes, because we asked them and we've delivered. Using a cyclical and iterative approach is basically, you know, you start with this idea and then you try and unpick it, then you do some writing, then you ask them to review it, and then you go back and dig deeper in areas, or you ask more people for their ideas. So that's kind of, actually, it sounds amazing what we did. Like when I actually listen back to it to myself, I think, you know what, I think we've done a really good job there. So yeah, so I talked about people like having this cycle of burnout. It's actually, I know actually saying people wrote until they got burnt out sounds actually a really terrible thing to say, but it's actually normal when you're neurodivergent to have these periods of you work and then you need to rest, and then you work and then you rest. I don't know how we get that balance really, but it's, if we take on it, we can work with our normal jobs quite often, or maybe not, but an additional project on top of your normal job is is going to lead to burnout at some point. So it's, you know, we actually have to work much, much harder to balance that. So if you don't know about it, it comes from something called spoon theory. If you've got neurodivergent colleagues, do please learn about spoon theory. There's a QR code there that you and a link to learn more about it there, because it's actually really it's actually a really helpful concept. So how to use the guidelines. All right, we've got about 16, 17 minutes left. So do you like this? Fancy, isn't it? With the thing coming up, auto playing. I thought that was really cool. Basically, what I'm advising people is that there are two main sections in the guidelines. There's actually, this moving is really distracting me. I can't look at it. So there are two sections in the guidelines. There's one section that is aimed at employers and one section that is aimed at the neurodivergent employee, but they both go together and they kind of should be read together. So in the employer section, there's this section called Developing a Neuroaffirmative Approach to Supporting Neurodivergent Colleagues or Neurodivergent Speech Language Therapists. Basically, it lists all of like common strengths and common challenges in different areas of like executive functioning, sensory differences, and emotional and well-being. Those are kind of like the three main topic areas. And what I recommend is that you just literally either print it out or get the PDF off the website and literally just go through and highlight everything that's relevant to you. As you can see in the thing the loop that's playing there, I'm literally highlighting things. You know, this is me going through myself and highlighting the things that I thought, yeah, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. And that's how I worked out that actually I have these needs, because then I could identify with these. But as an employer, you know, I'd encourage you to use that document in that way, and you know, and either sit down with your neurodivergent employee and use it to be curious. So be curious of difference, because actually you might find that there's some things that actually you have similarities. Actually, oh, I struggle with that too. So maybe actually we can look at that, something that we can implement as a bigger thing that more of us in this department can benefit from this. So about normalizing difference, I think, is really important. And then in the other section, which is called Examples of Neuroaffirmative Adaptations and Reasonable Adjustments, I don't like that title very much personally myself, but again, it's basically reasonable adjustments, and the titles match the ones. So the memory section in the first section also matches then the memory section, and it has some examples of adjustments that support people with memory differences. If I was like head of department, which I kind of am, but I'm the only speech language therapist, so I can't do it as a group activity. But if I was the head of department, I think I would actually take these and like let everybody go through and highlight their own differences, their own strengths and their own needs, and normalize that. Actually, you know, if we've got a whole area where lots of people have things that are the same, let's look at this as a group, and you know, of neurotypicals and neurodivergents all together, saying let's do something different here. Okay, just some ideas. Right, so I'm not going to go into this much, but in the guidelines as well, we do have like a large section on how to be an ally, and I've just put some of the some useful graphics here. As we know, if you do nothing, you're not, you know, you it's when we talk about like being anti-racist, you actually have to do something. You can't be a passive bystander. and be anti-racist in the same way as being an ally to neurodivergent colleagues. If you're doing nothing, you're still in the same camp as those that might be marginalizing that group. But actually, it's really important to be an ally is to educate yourself. So, reading through this document and learning more about neurodivergence and how that looks in a workplace setting is really important. And then interrupting the behavior is about then saying, well, actually, I'm going to act on some of the things that I've seen here. Maybe we do it small steps at a time. But that's your journey towards being an ally, because actually it's really hard for us as a neurodivergent employee for us to actually be able to say, I need you all to disrupt your behavior, because there's more at stake for us, because we're already feeling threatened about our job security and about whether we're good enough to be here anyway. So actually we need allies to help us and to fight with us to make those changes. I'm not going to go through these, but I would recommend spending some time with your departments, with your, the larger employment structures, looking at things like the wheels of power and privilege, and just educating yourself in these things. There's also neurodiversity zones of growth that's a really helpful tool too. So inclusive futures then. It would be great to see people be more curious about difference, making sure that there's a psychological safety to talk about implicit biases, that we think about intersectionality, inclusion, and that sense of belonging and what that looks like for neurodivergent colleagues. That we think about ableism. I know I haven't talked about that much, but it's just, this is your homework, if you like. Thinking about ableism, thinking about ideas of fairness and how that fits in with the role of power and privilege as well. It's about thinking about using the right tools to support our colleagues, and thinking about how we become an ally to neurodivergent colleagues. Next steps, and then this is my last slide, okay? I am starting a master's degree, which is a piece of research on the experiences of neurodivergent speech and language therapists, and I'm starting that in February, and I'm really excited about it. And if you'd like to learn more about it, you can sign up to our ND Allies, to our Neurodivergent Allies newsletter. And you can, if you wanted to be involved in as a participant or an ally in the study, or just to find out more about what we're doing, you can sign up there. And we're also on social media. We're on X, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Blue Sky, and the Peer Sports group is on Facebook.